This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend, the end.
See? I'm a fucking magician. I know my technology. Esteban, are you recording for the time being? And because if not, if you need to leave, like we can just get someone else to record. Yeah, you're recording for the time being. Okay, cool. If you need to leave, we'll sort something out. But yes, everyone, welcome. Welcome to our Heart of Darkness discussion. A few people will be joining in and out. Everyone knows the gist here. Like, raise your hand. You want to come in, and if you want to stay in the audience for the whole thing, you just want to listen, you just want to lurk, by all means do it. Let's kick it off. So today, going to be talking about Heart of Darkness, and I'm sure with that we're probably also going to be talking about Apocalypse Now as a comparison, because Apocalypse Now might be one of the most important and famous adaptations of a novel ever. And it's probably the prime example that we think of an adaptation because of how cinematic it is. And as it works as an adaptation again, it's very, very loose. And for those of you that haven't read Heart of Darkness before, I'm sure reading through it's you see the bones of Apocalypse Now, but it's not a one for one. It's a reimagining more so. But in regards of Heart of Darkness, so Heart of Darkness was written by Joseph Conrad in 1899, and it was inspired by his own life and travels in the Congo. So for those that don't know, Conrad was born into a former noble family, part Polish Ukrainian descent. And if you look at his life, he had a very long interest in sailing and embarked on many voyages, part of British military and whatnot. But his embark into the Congo was his main influence for Heart of Darkness. Now, many events and characters from his real-life voyage have been placed into the framework of Heart of Darkness to the point that many would consider the work as semi-autobiographical. There's instances in which people have traced Conrad's actual voyages, and you can read his diaries from the events that would have taken place at the same time that Heart of Darkness was supposed to be inspired by. And you can see almost direct parallels. You can see character names which are just roughly changed around. But it very much is a retelling or a recreation of an experience that Conrad had, or a multitude, a coalescence of experiences that Conrad had whilst in the Congo. Now, the novel takes place at the height of the British Empire, and it puts us in the belly of the Belgian occupation of the Congo. So, if people are unfamiliar with this point in history, I mean, we still see the ramifications of it now. One of the major things that the novel is going to be talking about throughout is going to be imperialism and the almost futility of imperialism and the violence that is a result of imperialism. For those that are unfamiliar with the issue of King Leopold occupying the Congo, it's one of the, or perhaps it's the poster child for imperialism and colonialism gone wrong, and all of the worst attributes that can emerge from such a system. The idea of the complete dehumanization and working into slavery of an entire peoples with no regard for their life whatsoever is one of the darkest settings that humanity's ever seen, and as such, it's one of the darkest settings that were placed in within the framework of the novel. So we open with a narrator, and the narrator goes unnamed, and Conrad sets the framework with the character Marlowe, who's one of the men on board of his vessel who recalls to us the tale of his encounter with a Mr. Kurtz. So, by all means, I won't give a full synopsis. If anyone wants to come in and we can discuss whether it's your first reading, whether you've read it before, whatever people's opinion is of the book, we can start getting people involved and we can just all have a back and forth and discuss what we thought of Heart of Darkness. And for those that don't know, if you do want to come inside, just raise your hand. There's the requests, and I can let you in. And yeah, George, there's multitudes of documentation of what the colonized Congo under Leopold II looked like, and it's everything that we think of. All of the sorry. Oh, Carol said, sorry for being rude. The last period. Oh no worries. Everything, no, yeah, it's fine. I didn't think you were rude. Don't worry. But yeah, George, to say what you said, I mean, all of the worst aspects that we could think of with slavery, all of the worst aspects that we could think of, any kind of indentured servitude, we have full documentation of that from the Congo, and it seems to be worse than we could possibly imagine. And this is where Heart of Darkness takes place in. It takes place in a landscape of native peoples that have been completely disregarded and used as, or more so that they're perceived as nothing more than savage beasts that are completely separate from any kind of civilization. And for me, this is one of the things that I noticed, and it's one of the struggles that people have when reading Heart of Darkness, is that there's a narrator, which we assume is Conrad. He goes unnamed, but the person telling the story is Marlowe. And one of the difficulties that people have with the novel, and I think it's a valid criticism to have, is that the voice and perspective of Conrad, we don't know if that is the same perspective that's shared by Marlowe. And there is an almost disregard for the natives of the Congo from Marlowe's perspective, because he is someone that thinks that these people are alien to civilization, that Marlowe believes that there's a futility in the imperial voyage within the Congo, not because there's an innate dehumanization from imperialism, but that these savages, they are too removed from the very idea of civilization that they're beyond help. No one could help them regardless of what system they were in. These are people almost destined to not be part of civilization, and all they will do is bring civilized man down. And this is a reading of the novel that it does become very difficult because it really blurs the lines of what Conrad believes and what he doesn't. And yeah, George, I agree. Like, his perspective is more racist than what I expected, but somehow more anti-colonial too. It is 100%. I think the exact same thing, because it's very clear that Conrad, or I mean Conrad or Marlowe's perspective is an anti-colonial one, but is this just to protect the quote civilized man? Because the way that he treats the savages, the languages that he used about the savages, it's so. It's that they have no soul. It's that they have no brain. It's that all they are these wanton masses of destruction and borderline profane behavior. It's something that I would actually like to hear people's opinions on, because I can definitely see it both ways. He is absolutely anti-colonial. Tyler says, I actually think it's how further right-leaning people view the rest of the world outside the West. Yes, I agree with that also.
Yes, hello. Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Um, Wait, can you hear me? Like, what the? Oh my God. Okay, okay, finally. Not this time. Not this time, buddy. Okay. All right, so yeah, this is my second read of Heart of Darkness. It's been many, many years the first time I read it was, of course, because of the source material that we all know and love, and again, because that was the point where like I was just reading a bunch of stuff for my favorite films, like a bunch of Kubrick films and Godfather, just because I was just so obsessed with those films. But yeah, now with this read, I was kind of just trying like as much as I could to just see the book as it is, and and I just the thing about obviously I have the same feelings that I get from the film that I can compare to, but as it is, it is a very interesting style of just literature, of the structure in how it's simply just of a journey where like all the story points in which Marlowe is speaking to us, and like all like, it seems like it's just a giant like inferno-esque kind of like exploration of a place where the further you go, the more the darker it becomes, and the more that it kind of becomes quite hazy in just its reality. Like I remember like when I was like rereading it for this book club, and how early on when Marlowe is describing like a giant map in one of like his like first locations, and how he sees it, and it's like he sees how vivid its hues are. You see the reds, you see the blues, you see the purples, like the greens, but he knows he has to go to the yellow. And that's like the yellow is like the absolute like center destination that is. And to me that was like it's such a great description of not just his the scent, but also just of the style, and how it almost feels so hallucinogenic. Like I kind of admittedly like I was kind of like just in awe of just its like of its journey, that I wasn't really sometimes I didn't really pay attention to just like the specific words that were just said. I was just watching the whole experience all in, and that's how I feel. And I think by the end, where it's the major ending that I think we can talk about, because that's something I want to discuss, just the ending of the book, of how what it cements, of what it's trying to say, specifically about of Europe in general. I think is just left me quite yeah, it was quite a it left me did it did leave me a bit speechless by the end. Yeah, like, I wanted to mention that ending. Like I was, yeah, I was like kind of happy like you mentioned that, because I just wanted to, because like that's obviously the biggest unique scene that's like exclusive to the novel, that like not really like any type of interpretation that comes afterwards really like, I think portrays like that much, in terms of how I loved how it's the most obvious lie he like you could ever say. When you say like your name, like we don't know her name, like what is there to actually say? So to me it's like it's just like it's so blatant. I think the blatantness of how like it's such an obvious lie, I think speaks to how I think to me, like I think it goes to what I see in Kurtz. I wanted to say like what I see in Kurtz is not only what how he perceives himself, but how others perceive him as like a false god, and how I think this mentality of like a type of title of this god is quite prevalent in history, of how we take advantage of the knowledge. Like funny, I think like like another book comparison we've done recently would be like Dostoevsky's Underground, and how this idea of intelligence, and of like thinking that okay, because we have the knowledge and we have the awareness, and we can and that like, we can take advantage of stuff, that means that we are superior, and that we get the excuses, and we are seen as like almost like the Ubermensch, the kind of Nietzschean philosophy, haha. But like ultimately at the end of the day, when we see the people for what they are, just as humans, because ultimately there always will be humans, it's a very much a falsehood, and it's very much of a sense of the only like with our mortality, we don't we let's just say we don't have an awareness of the higher being. We will never fully confirm that, so all we have are humanity that tries to play God, and the way to play God is always very much materialist. As we were saying, I think the way that anyone like that tries to play God is quite materialist. It could never be fully like this ephemeral thing of how, we actually have something, because for everyone it seems ephemeral, because they don't they like they're taking advantage of how little they know, because obviously, the people that can easily oppress them make sure that that knowledge of, of modern technology and of intelligence and of history is purposely made to be repressed. And, I think that's the difference between with Marlowe and like his background of like the mother of just like of the mainland Europe, and what Kurtz does is that it may come from different ideas of, okay, we are this power and we get to fully like oppress people, whereas of course Kurtz embraces that lifestyle of being in the jungle, but ultimately, it is still from a, from the from the higher powers that be of, we already have the knowledge, and it is this kind of, Kurtz has this veneer of, okay, because I've ingratiated myself into this world, but like I get to still keep that sense of knowledge that I've learned from being part, used to be part of that mainland. That means that I have a sense of, I think in his mind when he goes mad, I think like part of that madness comes from that acknowledgement that he like knows deep down that he always will still be part of the quote the mainland, and the idea of living in the Congo is just a way of just still maintaining this idea of the superiority, which I think like that's sort of shows of how it's systemic. And I think the more I think, I guess like that can be considered like the darkness of like when you obtain power and you become so corrupted by it. When you, I think like, power, they say power corrupts, which, that's obviously a very broad idea, but when it comes to Kurtz, it's this idea of power that is like in dialogue with knowledge, it's in dialogue with your existence, it's in dialogue with history, and it's something where, it will always be like a part of our lives. It will be part of history, and it will continue if we just make that be, something that is just accepted as part of our humanity. Yeah, that's why like while we're like, using cinematic comparisons, like Herzog, something, a film that I was thinking of that, I wasn't really thinking that much of Apocalypse Now when reading it. What I was mainly thinking of was actually Zama by Lucrezia Martel, which, also is based on a book. Yeah, because like that film, which I haven't read the book, I've always wanted to, but that film, even more so than Apocalypse Now, it's like, because I feel that Apocalypse Now, like the structure of it, what it is, like the most different thing is the sense of ritual. It's like a semi type of spiritual. I wouldn't say full spiritual, but this idea of predestination, and like it's almost kind of a thing of like that's what always is always going to be, like it's not really a quote choice to be have, whereas with Zama, it is pure choice with Daniel Jimenez Cacho's main character, of how, the way he, like we see the entire film basically through his lens, and the way that what Martel does with that film is essentially just she makes the world feel a bit hazy. You have moments when like they're like he's in a meeting and like there's just a random llama just shows up out of nowhere. It feels quite like hallucinogenic, and it's just like at the very end when he and his crew have to actually go into the jungle, and like it just like it, and they have that ending. I'm not gonna try and spoil it, but I just love the ending of how basically like his choice to go and charge in and be completely ignorant and only be very selfish. It's just like it completely bites him in the ass at the end. I mean, what I would say about the Russian is just like it's just kind of like in many ways it's kind of just the same thing as everything else when it comes to how it's just the perspective of Marlowe, of how, let's just say like it's just the default English perspective on how like many people would see the world of everything is quote foreign, everything has just is just stripped down to its bare essentials, which is how like a lot of people, especially in an imperialist mindset, that's how they perceive a lot of things that is outside of their familiarity, I would say. I like what George says about Kurtz, how like a certain amount of hatred that still allows them to be ingrained within natives, but not enough love to see the actual humanity with them. Which, we were saying this before about like of this idea of the leftist mentality when it comes to indifference with the right of how they perceive the world, particularly of like a colonialist era, and how in modern times we now would call these people the white saviors, or like trying to have a falsified sense of virtue. And in many ways, I would argue that's like almost as dangerous, if not more, because especially I think there is a sense where we need to understand the context, and I think have a self awareness of who we are in the world right now, because I think it's undeniable of how specific European countries that have so much influence, you know even if you didn't do anything with that, that's part of your history of the absolute barbarism that comes with imperialism and the obtainment of land from other less fortunate countries. And so to completely ignore that and act like I'm not like other people is and to try and act like you are like being a quote rebel, but at the same time you still have the same actions of wanting to get that sense of superiority from others. It's like, especially with other people like that, you with a culture that you are not unfamiliar with. It's yeah, it is a bit insensitive to me, at least. I just had like just one last like small comment of just like my favorite description in the book was when like Marlo first meets Kurtz and they hug each other and describe it as like his hug, it feels more strong than any other man in history, or like I'm paraphrasing, and I thought like that was one of the most vivid descriptions I've read in my life.